Welcome to Vinnova. My name is Peter Svensson, and this is the Swedish Innovation Agency. We're here today to have a report on Fintech presented. And we're really happy about the lineup of presenters and also the audience to have a discussion with you guys. So we have Minister Per Bolund here. We have Matthew Argent, the founder of the Fintech Hub in Stockholm. We have Kristina Söderberg, venture capitalist, soon to arrive. And we have the principal investigator and author of a report, Benjamin Ståhl. So today's schedule or agenda will be a short introduction. We will have Benjamin go through the report, and then we will have a few questions and comments to Per Bolund, and also a discussion with you. And then Per needs to depart at 10 o'clock. And we will have a more open session with the panel and the audience involved. So this is web streamed, so we have to have microphones when we ask our questions. So we will send out a mic when needed. Okay. So Stockholm today and Sweden is quite astonishing when it comes to startups. I think there is like 6 unicorn companies in this region, and that's unprecedented, unheard of outside of Silicon Valley, almost. And the hottest sector is Fintech sector. So this is important for Sweden and Stockholm. Vinnova, we fund small startups. So we have seen this trend for the Fintech startups. So we fund more and more the last years. We also help innovation ecosystems by strategic research financing. And right now we have an open call. It's called Data-Driven Labs. And it's we really hope to get applications from the Fintech industry. It could be that you gather different APIs and open up for use for other Fintech companies, and you build an infrastructure together. And Erik Borelv at the end here is in charge of this project, so please talk to him afterwards. Okay, we're also happy to say that we have established a relationship with Stockholm Fintech Hub. And we have Matthew Argent here, Fintech expert and founder of the Hub. So could you briefly mention what you do at the Hub?
Good morning, everybody. We set up the Hub, we launched the Hub physically as a physical space to connect the financial services innovation ecosystem 2 months ago now. And we're in offices above Central Station in SJ's old building. The idea, maybe 6-7 months ago, for those who don't know us and haven't been on that journey with us, was to do basically these 3 elements of the chart that we have here. And that is to get banks, to get the startup community, and to get the regulators into one place, talking, communicating, collaborating, as opposed to siloed approached work that we were seeing happening here in Sweden. Now, Sweden has a fantastic history in terms of financial services. We've got a stable economy, a stable government. Michael here from Stockholm School of Economics and his team with Robin Teagland wrote a report in 2015 that put us as the 2nd most invested in community hub country in the whole of Europe. Now, there's been a number of reports in the last 2 or 3 months of where we've sort of slipped down to 4th place. So the idea of the Hub is literally to give us a platform, all of us within this community, a platform to be able to get ourselves back to 2nd place, and hopefully, I'm Brit, I voted Remain, but post-Brexit, we can be pushing for the number 1 spot here. We have all of the right elements, we have the right companies, as Peter said, we're second only to Silicon Valley in unicorns that we've created here per capita. So to cut a long story short, because I don't have too much, and those of you know me, I do go on a bit sometimes about my passion, which is this, is that so far we've managed to sign up physically Nordea, Handelsbanken, Visa to be members and to actually be a part of the Hub. So that was our first journey, was to get banks to talk to each other, talk to the Fintech community, and to see innovation as a major part of their future. We're talking to the other banks as well, and we're at different stages of our conversations and contracts there. We've got here 200 startups in Sweden. We think ourselves, Dagens Industry and Stockholm School of Economics have merged our databases. We think that's going to be near 230, 250 funded startup companies. I'm looking at Michael, he's looking at me with nothing, so I think it could be about right. Of which about 155 are based here in Stockholm, and the rest are Göteborg, Malmö and other parts of the country. And we're reaching out to that via Swedish incubators and science parks to get into the universities in other parts. So it's a very Swedish initiative here. It's not a Stockholm initiative. And of course now I think we can say that we're in conversations on 3 different levels with Finansinspektionen to help communication, to help deliver some issues around how you hold financial data in a cloud environment on a Microsoft or an Amazon Web Services type of environment. And also just to sort of basically help with response times and understanding of what the community is wanting, and to give some feedback. And that's an early stage initiatives, all of them, but we're really pleased to be working with Finansinspektionen now. So we've achieved our first goal. We call it the 3 pillars. Off the back of that, we've got lots of stuff going on, which I won't go into now. Working with Business Sweden, we're part of a Fintech Hub Federation. We're part of a union of 49 Fintech hubs around the world. We're doing an initiative with the European Union in Brussels, where we're creating a coalition of 4 Fintech cities. Brussels, of course, that's that famous Fintech city where the power and money sits. But they've also got Paris, Frankfurt and ourselves. And because of this blueprint, we're now seen as the standard in Europe as how you build a hub and an ecosystem for financial services innovation. The idea of the coalition is to join up Europe in terms of best practice, data sharing, so that we can respond to the Asian and the US sort of waves of investments and fintech companies that we're seeing, hopefully giving our communities the platform to build successful companies quickly and competitively in a global environment as well as a local environment. We're helping, well, we're currently looking to, with the European Investment Fund, to create an e-krona venture capital fund to invest in early stage Swedish tech companies. It's a big thing. It's like our ability to be entrepreneurial within our environment. But if so, we've got a blockchain platform that we'll be building that will be the test bed potentially for the Riksbanken's e-krona promise. And what's probably the most exciting thing at the moment is the United Nations Environmental Programme, the UNEP inquiry, around delivering a 2030 agenda for green, sustainable, ethical financial services is now started. Now, we were lucky to be at the G7 summit around this in Venice 4 weeks ago. And our representative, one of our board directors, was able to give a solution in terms of a platform to deliver fintech as a way to deliver green financial services on top of bonds and impact bonds and all the other solar bonds, etc. With that, the UN have now agreed to use Sweden as a test bed. We're the first country in the world to be able to deliver this initiative that will be within our hub. We've got people here that will be a part of that. We're very proud of that, and we'll be announcing it at Almedalen this year. So we're working with the UN, we're working with the EU, we're working with the Swedish government, hopefully more. And we're working with the banks, regulators and the startups, and we're a physical place. Anyone's welcome to come in. We've got coffee and cakes and stuff. It's literally above Central Station. We want you to be part of the community. We want you to understand more about what we're doing, and you're all welcome.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Great. So now to today's event. To write a fintech report in 2016 and 17, that must be like shooting on a moving target. There's new information every day. So I'm really pleased to have you here, Benjamin Stoll, who has done this magic, and we are really eager to hear what you will present.
Thank you. Get this going.
Okay. Sorry. There you go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Minister. Yes, shooting at a moving target. That's certainly it. I'm from Blue Institute. We're a research institute focusing on sustainable growth and the competitiveness of Swedish businesses and the attractiveness of Swedish markets. Over the last few years, we've had the privilege to look at the impact of different emerging phenomena and emergent technologies and what impact they can have for Swedish companies. and globally. And I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's contributed to this report. Many of you are in this room, and of course to Vinnova for making this happen, and for interesting dialogues on the way. So thank you, Peter, Emma, and everybody else. Having said that, all the faults are my own. So Fintech, yeah, moving target. There's been a lot of interest in Fintech over the last years, and it's probably accelerating. As you can see from this slide, which is the Google searches for the search term Fintech. Since a few years back, this interest has really picked up. You'll notice a dip. It's the week after Christmas each year. I think we're, maybe financially satiated around that time. There's about 22 million results, so I've read a lot this last year. But basically this has also coincided with a tremendous amount of investments into this area. As we heard previously, this is the largest category for venture capital and has been so for the last few years. Globally, in Sweden, in China, etc. These are billions of dollars of venture capital going into private companies. So to that we must add all the bank investment, financial incumbents investing into this area, tech companies investing into this area, and of course investments by public companies. Why is this happening now? Financial services have been going digital for decades. Computerization has occurred since the 50s and 60s. Money has been pure information since the end of Bretton Woods. We've seen three drivers, basically. Technology, customer expectations changing, and a shift in the financial landscape since the financial crisis. The first of this, the rise of technology, as you all know. The rise of Fintech very much coincides with the rise and the extension of mobile telephony and smartphones in the world. The digitization of money coupled with a mobile phone as a platform for consuming and distributing financial services is creating huge opportunities in how you deliver, how you reach out to customers, and how you can do that in an efficient way. And at the same time, all the technology is going into analytics, big data, cloud services, makes it easier to build companies and easier to scale solutions and to reach a big audience very quickly. So technology is certainly driving this. The other change is in customer expectations and reaching new customers. Previously, the banking relationship was one of lifelong relationship. A bank handled all your financial needs, basically, but that's not the case today. For a long time, we've seen a decrease in direct customer interaction with banks. Ironically, with a bank in your pocket, our interaction with our account is higher than ever. If you remember how often you logged into your internet bank compared to how often you log into your mobile bank, it doesn't even compare. But the switching costs have also become extremely low. You just move your thumb and you open up another app. You can download another app and you can choose among several providers. And today, I think for the first time in a long time, more than half of all Swedes, for example, have more than one banking relationship. So this is certainly opening up. The third area is in the financial landscape since the financial crisis. After the financial crisis, in many parts of the world, not necessarily Sweden, banks were hit by several problems. First of all, the crisis itself, the regulation following upon that, the loss of customer confidence in them, capital requirements going up and profitability going down meant that there was less ability to invest in innovation. At the same time, with low or even negative interest rates, there are customers or investors who are looking for other sources of returns. This was in many cases provided by Fintech or emerging solutions in crowdfunding and other areas. So these are the three main drivers of the Fintech revolution or the Fintech transformation of the finance sector. Having said that, there is no common definition of what is Fintech. I mean, just before this meeting, talking about what is fintech, there's no real consensus, and it's almost not meaningful to categorize something as fintech or not. Some see it as a big fight between banks and startups, where startups will transform and eradicate the need for banking. We've heard that before. At the same time, we see a lot of banks being innovative, investing in these areas. We see a lot of partnerships between startups and challenging fintechs and banks. We see a lot of other actors entering this space. The digitization of money and mobile, as I said, gives extremely interesting opportunities to get closer to the customers. So merchants are very interested in this. And e-commerce providers and all the tech providers providing our platforms for communication and for buying stuff and investing stuff are entering this place. So it's not a mess, but it's a complex landscape, and in this report we call it a process. Fintech is a process rather than a typical company. Having said that, looking at what we're trying to get more of an understanding what's happening in this space, we can look at the core functions of retail banking. You have a bank to have a way to pay, to get a loan, and to put your money in savings for a future day. We also look at adjacent fields like insurance and enabling technologies like blockchain, which everybody is certain will be huge. We just don't know when or how, but it's coming for sure. The amount of money going in there, it should be. But taking a look at some of these other core areas, when it comes to payments, payments is by far the largest category and the oldest category for fintech. And it's a huge market. $1.8 trillion annually. A third of bank revenue comes in this space. So it's attractive. There's a lighter regulatory touch often in this area, and customer acquisition costs are comparatively low. So there are lots of different solutions offering electronic and therefore also mobile payments nowadays. Either using some own kind of solution, but more commonly riding on the card networks or on the bank transfer markets in innovative ways. A lot of this has grown with the rise of e-commerce. PayPal, good example in the US, Klarna in Sweden, Alipay and Alibaba in China. What these solutions do is to eradicate friction, really, in automating payments, you could say. If you remember 10 years ago, a lot of us were afraid to put our credit card data online. It was hard to do so. You needed a lot of stuff. It took time. Nowadays, you can sit on the subway, download apps, purchase deliveries, etc., without a second thought. So reducing friction and encouraging conversion. Mobile money solutions is another big area, and I'll come back to that. Also driven almost exclusively by mobile operators rather than banks. Remittances. International remittances is a market of $500 to $600 billion annually, 3 times the size of development aid, plagued by very high fees, 7 to 10%, and slow transfer times. Just by eradicating the fees on international remittances, you would be increasing development aids by a quarter. Cryptocurrency, bitcoins and others also fall into this category. Looking at loans or credit and financing, there's a lot of interesting things going on here, and the basic idea is to sort of give an alternative to a core function of banks, which is being the intermediary between the deposits and people needing financing. In this way, you're actually changing the intermediary from one of being across time to being a platform directly connecting lenders and investors. P2P, peer-to-peer, lending is the biggest category here, for sure. It evolved a bit more than 10 years ago in the UK, and shortly after in the US and in and in China, they've evolved quite differently. In the UK, it's become an established, not so large function, mostly focused on small businesses. In the US, it grew very quickly, but leveled off last year and actually shrank in terms of valuations and growth rates. And in the US, unless you count Goldman Sachs as your peer, it's actually a vehicle for institutional capital into a consumer space. In China, the growth picked up a bit later, but it's been explosive and it's continuing. I'll come back to that. But in China, peer-to-peer lending or online lending, online finance, is actually having a significant dent into the market of consumer lending, about 10% by some estimates. Peer-to-peer lending is a kind of crowdfunding. There are also other crowdfunding areas, as you know. Reward-based crowdfunding like Kickstarter give innovators and entrepreneurs the ability to secure funds before they actually go into production or develop an idea. A great space for minor ideas and freelancers, but also for quite big projects like movies, games, and even blockchain or autonomous organizations. Then we also have crowdfunding whereby companies issue equity for funding, equity-based finance or equity-based crowdfunding. And this area is quite interesting because you don't only get the financing, you also get the marketing, and you get a load of ambassadors. And you don't have to go through the often quite convoluted process of being listed on a stock exchange. So we're seeing a lot of actions in that area, funded by me, Swedish example of that. There are other, like factoring credit or lines of credits is another area, commonly done or carried out by payment processors or actors that are in the payment space, like Klarna, iSettle have these kind of solutions. It's a great way to get funding for a small business, which is not normally the target or of interest to the banks. Credit scoring is an interesting category. It's part of all these products normally, but it's also a standalone product like Credit Karma in the US or Sesame in China. The thing about this is that all this kind of lending activities depend on the ability to accurately assess risk and manage risk. And this is done in very interesting ways compared to how it's done traditionally. Looking at alternative sources of data, not just the financial transaction history. So we actually have examples of looking at how you perform at dating or other kind of data that are now available. Social media profiles, social media activity. And this might sound funny, but it's imperative that this kind of risk assessment can be done because a lot of people do not have a financial transaction history. The unbanked, the young, etc. And then, of course, we have investments and savings. I'm going through this quickly. The reverse side of crowdfunding is, of course, in investments. There's a lot of development towards robo-advice and online brokerage. Robo-advice is, of course, also becoming quite prevalent in banks themselves. There are there's a slew of apps promoting savings. Swedish Dreams is an example, where you tie social elements, gamification, goal-based elements, and rules for automating savings. Like every time I buy a beer, round up my tab and put it in a savings account. There's a little, or quite a few things going on in pensions, but it's a bit more inertia in that field. But around price comparisons, transparency, and not least also there robotic advice is a category. And then alternative deposits like money market funds instead of bank accounts. The same liquidity, higher returns, and you keep the money in the ecosystem or at least out of the banks in the cases of these providing this. As I argue in the report, a lot of these product and these new actors, they are transforming or they're putting pressure on incumbents. They do it by unbundling, basically, the bank offering, diminishing the ability to cross-sell and cross-subsidize, putting pressure on margins. But it will become, it is already a bit more convenient for us, but there are also a lot of opportunities for the incumbents here to leverage these kind of technologies to decrease their costs and improve their customer offerings and the customer experience. So in many of these, it's not really transformative or disruptive, even though that it's changing the way we consume and deliver financial services. But there's one area where fintech and the fintech revolution is really truly disruptive and where it's not driven by banks. Today, there are more than 2 billion people that are unbanked, no access to formal financial services. This is, of course, a huge problem. Not having access to financial services is very costly, it's insecure, it's time-consuming, and it's a real obstacle for development. Having said that, we can see that it's moved very quickly. 700 million people have gotten access to financial services between 2011 and 2015. And this is almost exclusively due to fintech developments. So what we see in our part of the world with almost universal coverage is not true for Africa, South Asia, East Asia, Latin America. But this is, as I said, changing rapidly, and mobile money is the main cause of this. Mobile money is almost exclusively driven by mobile operators and fintech and tech firms. There are more than 500 million accounts, mobile money accounts today, and 19 countries have more mobile accounts than bank accounts. Mobile accounts are about 90% less costly to operate than a bank account. They also create jobs and a source of income in rural areas and for a lot of agents and that kind of infrastructure. It also opens up the ability to deliver other adjacent services via mobile. Health, education, paying utility bills and so on, but also mobile insurance. Mobile insurance has really exploded. This is micro insurance. Most of it is life insurance, but also a lot of health and accident insurance, as well as agricultural insurance, insurance against drought, and so on and so forth. So financial inclusion, if it continues, will almost eradicate the unbanked, a big boost to GDP, a lot of new jobs already by 2025, putting us well on track for the Agenda 2030. And this is the most transformative part of fintech. Now, this is not just basic services. This is not just a basic version of us. Actually, this is run very innovative, cost efficient, and with great interfaces. And the real transformation, as we heard, the waves coming in from Asia, are actually not occurring in our legacy economies. China clearly leads the fintech transformation. China is the largest market for investments by far. Last year, it outpaced the US. The first half of last year, it eclipsed all the rest of the world combined. There are the largest number of users. More than 800 million users use WeChat. A third of the time spent online in China is spent on WeChat. They have the largest market shares, really putting a dent into the incumbent financial sector and especially banks in China. They have the largest companies, not only the largest unicorns, but also Alibaba was the largest IPO ever on Nasdaq in 2014. Tencent is huge. There are very big, well, both banks and insurance companies. And they are seldom one product or one category even companies. They are large, complete ecosystems with commerce, messaging, communication, finance. And they are expanding globally. Expanding in Asia, in Africa, but also following their merchants and Chinese tourists, which is now the biggest group, into the West. So how does Sweden fare in this? Well, we heard a lot about it, so I'll go quickly. Basically, we have a good financial infrastructure that's been built for a long time. We had a deregulation, credit boom, subsequent banking crisis. There's a silver lining to every cloud, and this was that our banks actually emerged quite strong and very productive. Nordic banks, and especially Swedish banks, are the benchmark when we're looking at how many jobs will be lost in the banking sector. We also had an IT boom in the 90s with high adoption rates, but also the creation of private capital for investment, business angels, and experience and competence in how to build companies. And as we heard before, it's the largest category for investment, second largest fintech hub in Europe, highest per capita investments into fintech in Europe, more than 1 billion crowns. And well, I was clearly wrong. It's 200 active companies.
It changes every day.
Yeah, changes every day. So, yeah, we have, I think Sweden has a great position, good preconditions. We now have a good, even better infrastructure, because these are some of the ways, and I delve into them a bit more in the report. But I have to be quick now. So how do we promote, how is fintech being promoted around the world? Well, by bolstering demand, using it. Just like we use bank ID, a mobile bank ID for e-government services. Mobile payments and the use of fintech platforms is used, for example, in India with great success. Supporting innovation infrastructure. We've had quite a good infrastructure, incubators, working spaces, accelerator programs, both official and or publicly sponsored, but also in companies. And with a fintech hub in Stockholm, we'll get even better there. Use of crowdfunding in innovation funding is interesting. Read more about it. I hope Vinnova picks up on that. It's being used in Britain. Very exciting. But of course, regulatory development. Regulatory sandboxes, adaptation of rules to new technology and so forth and so on is the main way forward is here. Thank you. On time?
Yes. Thank you, Benjamin. So this was a great presentation, and we have a clear view of how the map, the fintech map, looks like. So I would like to welcome Per Bolund on stage, and I will start with asking you, according to the report and other reports, it seems as if fintech has a huge growth potential, but at the same time there are risks associated with innovation and financial markets. So how do you perceive this new wave of financial innovations?
Well, I think everyone knows that there are risks connected to the financial sector. We've seen it quite recently, and it almost blew the world economy. So, of course, this is something we always have to be aware of, and no matter whether it's in new solutions like fintech or in the old solutions like the regular banking sector. So this is something we must always bear in mind, of course. But from the Swedish government, we see the fintech development and the digitalization of the economy as a great way to handle these risks and to also give us new tools to handle them. And we see that the fintech development has huge potential for facilitating our markets, giving more efficiency to the economy. And also, I'm not just the Minister for Financial Markets, I'm also the Minister of Consumer Affairs. And for consumers in the financial markets, I think that these new technologies open up completely new ways to handle your economy and to get more bang for the buck, so to speak, actually get access to much better deals. So from the Swedish government, we see the fintech development as a great potential for development and innovation in the economic sphere and in the financial markets. And of course, we are trying to do everything we can to give this development another push and give it even more power forward. Finding ways to cooperate with the sector to lower the thresholds and the barriers that are there, and also giving access for the consumers to these services in different ways. So we think that we, of course, are very proud of the development we see in Sweden and in Stockholm, and we think that part of the reason why Sweden is quite far ahead when we compare to other countries is that we have actually pull the development together, and government authorities have done their part in establishing the digital infrastructure, for example, enabling other actors to get access to this infrastructure and deliver completely new services to Swedish consumers.
So you mentioned that you look at other countries. You were recently in London and to discuss fintech issues. I've seen in Ireland that they have they see an opportunity in fintech, and they have kind of like a strategy, and then like a post-Brexit strategy. So after Brexit, can more fintech companies come to Dublin? Is that an opportunity for Sweden as well? And does the government have a role?
Well, let me start by saying that we really we are very sad about the decision from Great Britain. Of course, we think that Sweden and Britain has really pulled together in the European Union, not least in the fintech development area, and really getting the regulation to end up in the right place. So we will of course miss Great Britain very, very much in our cooperation within the European Union. Then on the other hand, when the decision is made, of course, we think that we can also have opportunities here, and we know that many British companies are looking at Stockholm, not least because we have a highly digitalized economy. We have a population that are quite keen to enter into new technologies and are early adopters, and so Sweden is a good starting market for trying new solutions and new possibilities. And of course, we're part of the inner single market and the European Union, so that gives access to, of course, lots of customers in the European Union. And one of the reasons I was in London was to discuss with fintech actors and with the big banks about the opportunities to actually develop business in Sweden. And I know that many of the big British banks are looking at, for example, positioning their innovation hubs and their innovation work in Stockholm and in Sweden, because they see that there is great knowledge, lots of expertise, lots of possible employees to get access to. And I know that there is a great interest, and of course we want to have a discussion with them and showing them that we also like to promote this development even further. And that is not just London. Of course, we see the development all over the world. So I've been leading fintech delegations to Hong Kong previously, and also to Singapore, providing an international market for the fantastic services that have been developed by Swedish companies. And we believe that the world needs our services and our competence. So of course, from the Swedish government, we would like to do what we can to promote Swedish fintech businesses to get access to a global market as well.
Sometimes you hear that it's very, very costly to be in a startup company in Stockholm, especially because of the housing situation. But compared to London, that couldn't be a problem, right?
Well, prices are quite high in London as well, of course. And on the other hand, there are opportunities to get access to housing in London in a faster way if you have the capacity to pay. So of course we have to see to it that the Swedish housing market works more efficiently, and we are working quite substantially on that area. And of course we now see that the housing development is really increasing, and the building capacity, and we are now building at a rate that we haven't seen in the last couple of decades, since the 70s. So of course much is happening, and I believe that there will be quite dramatic development in the coming years and decades on these areas. Then of course we know also that there is a cost situation, and Sweden is a high cost country. We are a country with high taxes because we have a mutual welfare system that we believe also is an opportunity for innovation. Because of course young people feel quite secure, and they are willing to take chances in Sweden that I believe that many young people in other parts of the world perhaps are not willing to do, because they don't have the social security and the welfare system to back us up, so to speak. But of course we are looking at how we can make the taxation system more appropriate for the fintech sector. And one aspect of that is, of course, that we have a proposal on staff employee stock options, lowering the tax quite dramatically on that, so that fintech companies and other innovative companies can use staff options to get access to the key personnel that they need and the key competence. because of course if you have to pay the highest salaries, there are other actors in the market that are available and that can pay substantially higher salaries. So but giving access to getting part of the company as an incentive to start working is, I think, a very, very good option. So that's why we took this step and lowered the taxes. And of course, we are also in a consistent dialogue with the sector, and I've been visiting many of the fintech companies in Stockholm, hearing what they need and what are the problems that they meet every day, and seeing what we can do from the government side to really facilitate the development.
So the author of the report, Benjamin, he claims that many of the fintech innovations have implications for sustainability. And the financial inclusion in China is enormous because of the service like Alipay. And we also see new ways of financing sustainable technologies. So I guess that this area is especially dear to you because of a member of the Green Party.
Absolutely.
So what's your thoughts of fintech and sustainability?
Well, I think that is one of the great options and opportunities for fintech development. We know that Swedish consumers and also growingly world consumers are increasingly aware and also increasingly interested in doing businesses that is not just good for your wallet and your personal economy, but also is actually good for the planet. And what is happening the last few years is that actually these two combine in a brilliant way. So people who are doing business with their hearts and trying to invest in a way that actually also gives opportunities for the planet's future has actually done better business. So I believe that fintech, for example, can give us information in an easy and accessible way to make based decisions when it comes to investments. For example, making it possible to assess your climate risk when you invest in different options, different companies. And this is information that has previously been quite hard to get to and to also evaluate compared to others. So I believe that fintech can really give opportunities here. And also, I think that fintech can also give access to a global market in a completely different way than we have had previously as private consumers. I recently visited Gothenburg, and a brilliant fintech company that gave access to us as consumers investing in solar projects in developing countries, where you get much better, of course, development of your economics and much better rewards, much better profits, and also at the same time doing an excellent deed for the planet and for the development, giving access to energy for energy deprived populations in the south. So that's also a brilliant example of how you can establish a platform, combining people who have money to invest and people who really need these investments in a very, very dramatic way. So I think that there are several options where fintech can really provide solutions for this development. But I also think that there are many other areas where fintech has a huge potential, and not least when it comes to our private economy. The financial markets is one of the markets that has the most problems from a consumer perspective, and our consumer agency has financial markets at the top of the complaint list every year. So of course we as consumers don't feel comfortable in the financial markets as they work today, but I think that fintech development can really help us with that, giving us information, giving us access to market opportunities in a completely new manner. And just one example that I saw is that the Swedish population today, or at the end of last year, had 1,600 billion Swedish kronor in bank accounts. That gives almost no interest rates whatsoever. So this is really a bad business for all of us. And of course, I think that fintech can give us access to new deals that are so much better, and that can also lead to development, for example, through crowdfunding, investing in new companies, developing, giving a boost to the economic development, and at the same time giving us much better opportunities to actually make money in a smarter way. So there are great options, and another example is, of course, the housing credits, where we know that the Swedish banks are at the moment cashing in quite substantially on people who have housing loans, and if we had information about the full market and of the opportunities that are there, picking the best option for our economy, that could really lower our expenditures dramatically and making the market more efficient so that we could have money to invest in other opportunities instead. And I think that if the Swedish banks don't see this development, which I think will be quite rapid, I think that is a great risk for the banking sector in Sweden. So I hope that they, and I see a tendency that they are also noticing this and starting cooperating with the fintech sector and the fintech actors, opening this market rather than trying to shut it down, which I think would be a very, very bad option from their perspective.
Great, thank you very much. So Matthew, I know that you mentioned that someone told you that they think Sweden is especially important when it comes to fintech and sustainability. Could you mention something?
Yeah, so I think that's from the UN's perspective. As Mr. Bolund said, I think we have the right climate here, we have the right culture, we're the right test bed to be able to actually deliver this program that we're going to do later this year. So when we were at the G7 4 weeks ago, the question was, where do we actually launch this testbed as fintech, as an enabler for the future green, sustainable, ethical financial services system? And of course, UK was off the table. That's where it was going to go. But post Brexit, so we do have benefits of being an out country now. So all of a sudden, we really put the case forward that Sweden was the right place for all of the right reasons. And we got some kickback, to be fair, from the UN, but we overcome those objections and we'll be able to launch this initiative shortly. So I think fintech works here for a number of reasons. Of some of the things we talked about, I think we've had infrastructure here in terms of broadband that works from a very early stage. The computer scheme, where everybody got a computer against the tax in the 90s, got people into the digital world. I think we've been used to looking at pensions and our savings in a digital environment for a long time. So the big question we get asked from the EU and the UN at the moment, and we're at Berlin in the end of the month at the G20 FinTech Summit around ethical financial services and 2030 agenda, is it a bubble? Is this a bubble? Because we're seeing what's happening in China. And to put some context on the Chinese piece that Ben talks about, the biggest FinTech hub in the world is in Singapore. It's 35,000 square meters. Did you go there?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funded. Huh?
It was impressive.
Yeah, funded by a Chinese venture capital firm whose funding, the LP, the limited partner, is the Chinese government. So not only are they hitting China, they're also hitting Asia. So we have to respond to that, not in a way that it's a fight, but in a way that we need to make sure that we're competitive in that global environment. And I think using the green ethical piece allows us to have that position of strength and to have that sort of credibility. And we're based on foundations here, and we're passionate to make that happen.
Yeah. So I will open up the floor for questions. It's actually primarily to Per Bolund because he has to run. But if you have, then we will open up for more kind of general questions and discussions later. Yes, here the brave first one, Cecilia. Welcome.
Well, I was thinking about consumer protection, and I think, as you said, there are lots of opportunities here, but there are also risks for consumers. What tools will you give the Finansinspektionen when it comes to sort of regulating those small actors going forward? Cecilia Hermansson, I'm at KTH.
Well, that of course is a very good question. There has been, in part of the debate, a very, very positive view on fintech that has sometimes also disregarded of the risks, because of course there are risks, and we've seen it happen in Sweden. One of the first startup firms in crowdfunding showed up to be not so trustworthy as they should have been. So of course there are risks that there will be golden miners moving into this area trying to just trick the customers and consumers, and I think that would be probably is one of the major risks for this development, because if the general population gets a view that these actors are not to be trusted, of course that's devastating for the market development. So of course we have to have a high degree of consumer security and also looking at financial stability when it comes to the development of this sector as well. But that should not lead us to having a negative view on this development, because I think that there are possibilities to combine these two, using the services and the innovation of the fintech sector to actually help us alleviate the problems of consumer security and also of having appropriate financial stability for the future. So, of course, we have increased the funding for the Financial Inspectorate, the FSA of Sweden, and we have also given them tasks and assignments to look at the fintech development. So that's something that they're looking at the moment. How can we give opportunity for new actors and new thinking to get access to market without having to fulfill all the regulations of a huge multinational bank, for example, because of course that's not possible for them to achieve. So one of the things that they are looking at the moment is having a regulatory sandbox in Sweden, as we've seen in other countries, where you can test your idea and see whether it works before you have to actually meet all the requirements from the authorities. So I think that this is probably a good way to work, to cooperate with the sector and trying to find solutions and giving access to the expertise of the authority, and also trying your methods in a smaller part of the market before entering fully into the total regulatory environment that we have. But we should, and I think that we should also have a regulation, and much of the regulation is of course on the European level, and today I see that we have too much of the same regulation for everyone, the biggest actors and the smallest actors. So I think that we should have a more divided regulatory framework where small actors who are not taking risks in the way that some of the other big banks, for example, have been, should not have the same requirements when it comes to regulation as the bigger ones. So that is something that we are pushing quite thoroughly in the European Union as well.
Just to add to that, I think one of the initiatives we're doing in the Hub is we're part of the EU Fintech think tank, which was launched last November, which is the first time we can have lobbying and we can have policy decision making around smaller incumbent businesses, as opposed to just looking at the large multinationals. So it is happening from a Brussels level, but it's very early days at the moment.
Any other questions now here? I will ask you about one at the back. Do you have a microphone there? So your name and where you come from.
Thanks, Peter. Great seminar. Ebba Lindergren from Vinnova. I have a specific question on the work on the pension funds with Alecta and SEDA. I saw a report yesterday in Dagens Industri that you were following them in New York, and I was just curious on an update how the actual concrete work goes to upgrade both the sustainability, and if there's any link to fintech in that regard regarding your discussion would be interesting to know. Thanks.
Well, of course, that links very much to the sustainability aspects of the financial markets, and also to the question of financial stability. We've had, of course, the pension funds of Sweden has really paved the way when it comes to sustainable business, and they've provided us with methodologies that haven't been there before, for example carbon footprinting, that are now available and used by private actors as well. And they've also started a great work of assessing their climate risks and also divesting from the biggest climate risks. So for example, the fourth AP fund has decided to divest from the 25% of the market within each niche in the market that have the highest emissions, and that's provided both a dramatic lowering of their climate impact and at the same time increased profits. So of course that was a golden opportunity. I'm surprised that not more actors are doing the same. But of course we want to raise the bar even further, making sure that the pension funds of Sweden are really contributing to the global development goals and the climate decision made in Paris, for example. So now we're getting into legislation that they have to work in a way that facilitates sustainable development, and that they should be really leading the way. So that is part of the work, when we're also giving them access to an opportunity to use a wider variety of financial tools so that they are not directed towards certain investments, so they have a broader area, a broader toolkit, so to speak, to work from. And of course, that also gives them access and opportunities to invest, for example, in innovative companies and startup development. So that is something I know that they are interested in and have been active in already for some part. But with this change in regulation, they will have greater opportunities to do this as well.
So one last question. Do you have a favorite fintech app, or do you use any? Funded by me, founder is here. Have you ever tried to crowdfund? Or?
Well, I'm always hesitant to name one because, of course, I think that this market is extraordinarily interesting, and I get extremely inspired every time I visit any of the fintech companies in Sweden. So I think that they have brilliant solutions in so many different markets, and it's really hard to pick one. But of course, crowdfunding, I think, is a very, very interesting opportunity for the future, because it combines the possibility for us as private investors getting access to actually better businesses rather than having our money in a bank account giving us nothing at all, and also at the same time providing funding for new companies developing completely new ideas, and companies that have previously had quite a problem getting access to bank credits, partly due to the new regulation on the European level. So this is, of course, a brilliant development. I think that also companies developing technological aids, like, well, for example, having easy payments even when you are moving about as a salesman, or whether you are standing in the square selling fruit or anything. Of course, there are new solutions there are so easily to get access to, and also that can give you access to a digital environment that you haven't had access to previously, and so many others. And perhaps, if I should say something, I think that the actors that are now providing financial information in completely new ways, I think will be perhaps the most transforming actors when it comes to the financial sector, because I think that they will have the opportunity to carve out bits of the banking markets that is there today. And we know that Swedish banks, as well as all other banks in the international environment, are bundling their business opportunities to consumers, saying that if you have all your business connected to us, you get a better deal, which is sometimes just better the first year or so, and then it's not better at all. And of course, if you can just separate these parts and getting the best deal for each part of your economy, that can really give you access to much more better financial activities as a consumer. And I think that if the big banks continue in the manner that they have previously, and if they don't see this development and see how this can really change the opportunities for us as consumers of the financial markets, that is a potential risk for their market shares for the future. And I hope that they notice this and that they will give access to the consumers for these services themselves, perhaps in cooperation with the fintech sector.
It's happening now. They're responding. So we're seeing investments, we're seeing white labeling, we're seeing partnerships with all of them.
And I also think that if the Swedish banks don't appreciate this development and really go fully into this development, there is also risk that other actors, as we've seen, for example, the Chinese actors are growing so dramatically, and they have access to a huge market. And of course, this gives them muscles to also enter into an international market and perhaps starting competing on a global level with the actors we have today. So I think that the way that the Swedish banks and Swedish large financial actors can have a market share in the future is by really adopting this agenda and giving opportunities for financial innovation, because otherwise they will have a really hard time in the future.
Yes, that's a good closing word. Thank you very much, Per.
Thank you so much, and thank you for an excellent report. It was very inspirational. Thank you.
And now, Kristina Söderberg, SEB Ventures, please come up on stage. And Matthew, you should stay here. And Benjamin will come up soon. So I will start with these two, and then we'll open up for discussion. So SEB is both a venture capitalist and a bank. When you invest in fintech companies, is it on? Yes. When you invest in fintech companies, I know that you've done that a few times now. Are you a venture capitalist, or do you see yourself as a banker and you make it a strategic investment?
It's actually a good question, or very relevant. So we have a history of investing in venture capital companies for the last 20 years or so. So purely venture capital investments. But now, since it's about 1.5 years ago, the management of SEB decided that we should also do strategic investments. So out of the, I would say, 5 fintech investments that we did last year, which was the sort of first fintech year that we had, we did 4 financial ones and 1 strategic.
Okay. Which one is the strategic one? Can you say that?
It's Think.
Okay.
Yeah. So with strategic, it means that we do the investment together with the business development parts of the bank. So they find a company that they find relevant for them to cooperate with, team up with, much closer than just we do an investment in order for them to actually have a solution in that area. So the option would have been for SEB, of course, to set up a similar solution themselves, which is of course doable. But then you will have to have the resources. It will take time, and then that's the assessment I would say all the banks are doing these days, figuring out in various areas where do we want to invest or buy or just partner up with fintechs, and where do we want to do the development ourselves.
Are you purely fintech investments now?
Nowadays, fintech digitalization. Disruption is a bit too too wide, maybe.
To last year.
Even so. No, so the history has been that we've been doing investment into tech, primarily more deep tech than no consumer companies. It's always been B2B and life science. And then there has been a different department within the bank called strategic investments, and they have been doing actually fintech investments. So it's not a new thing, but now it's us from a venture capital perspective doing it, and we have then a evergreen fund that where we takes the money from. It's about 2 billion that we can use.
Interesting. It's you're kind of opening up for the innovation ecosystem in fintech. So my next question is also to you that. There is isn't the valuation very high for fintechs right now? So
no. What do you say?
So how do you work with that? As is it the hype, or will this stay, or what do you think?
I mean, compared to if we just take Silicon Valley to go the furthest away, the valuations are even higher. So seen from that perspective, Sweden is still cheaper, but it's been a dramatic change since we moved into doing fintech investments from having done tech investments over the last 20 years. It's such a change, and I'm sure there are.
In what way?
In the valuation. Okay. So it's much earlier stage. All the companies are much earlier, since they need to go through the regulations. They need to get hold of all those customers that are today mainly banking customers. So it's much harder to actually get that first step into becoming a profitable company.
Did you help them with regulations? So if you invest in a fintech company, do you help them with the regulation issues, or how does that work? Or
it hasn't happened. I mean, it hasn't been necessary yet. So the companies that we've invested in, they've already come to that stage themselves. If we would invest in a company and they did not have managed the regulation part yet, then that would have to be a sort of strategic investment. Otherwise, it will be far too early on for us to invest in that company from a VC perspective. Yeah. So we are in general rather sort of late seed, early A stage investors. So we would want the companies to have a set of customers and some revenue equivalents. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. And then Matthew, you mentioned that you're part of this international network of fintech hubs, and you sent a report a few weeks ago that we're comparing the different hubs around the world. And I think Stockholm, Sweden came out pretty well, but could you mention something about like the strengths and the weaknesses?
Thanks, Peter. Just two things, just quickly on the last question. I think in terms of valuations in regulation with SEB Ventures, they do invest later stage, so that it's either gone through a licensing process or is going through one. The second thing in terms of valuations, we saw, as you correctly said, in the US, this massive drive up until 2015, but then we saw a crash. We've been much more stable here in Europe and especially in Sweden. So what's happened, I think, to drive the valuations up of fintechs here is that we've had a couple of investments from non-named venture capital firms that have actually seen a valuation set at a level that we didn't normally expect or necessarily want here. But I think we're seeing an evening out of that. In terms of yes, we're part of the Global Fintech Hubs Federation. So we're one of 49, it was last week, it adds every week, 49 fintech hubs, and it's been run by a thing called Innovate Finance, which is a not-for-profit European ecosystem for the fintech community. And we came 9th in the world on that particular one, 4th in Europe, so we've dropped 2 places in that sense. But we'll see when we deliver the Stockholm School of Economics report in June. There's the 2 reports and a book. So we'll see where we are from a like-for-like update basis then. But our weaknesses were, in all honesty, we didn't have the same ecosystem as some of the other countries that are emerging. And an example we can use is that we had the finance minister of Finland phone us up to ask to go and build a Helsinki hub. You talked about Dublin, we've had the same happening in Dublin. We've been asked to go and build a fintech hub there. So I think governments are investing in these hubs in other countries to make them quicker and to get to market. Now we saw Copenhagen's open in November last year. It was backed by the government and the Danish Banking Association and a number of venture capital firms, and that's enabled their community to sort of build products quicker and get to market quicker than we can do it here. But I think all of the right seeds are in place now. I think with what we're doing with the guys from Finansinspektionen and looking at how we get into a sandbox type of environment is the right thing to do. Copenhagen launched theirs this year. We'll be a bit behind, but I think that's the right way. I think investments are coming in. So there's the EIF are launching 3 new venture capital funds to do early stage investments here. That's really missing here in Sweden. We've got a lot of Series A players. We've got a lot of sort of Almi, angel sort of players, but nothing in between really. So I think all of the seeds are in place. We just need to really ramp it up. We really need to sort of, as a community, get it going and make sure that we have the platform for success.
Okay. So if there's anyone out there now that would like to have a comment or a question, the floor is open. So just shout or wave your hand. Please say your name and where you come from.
Michael Gromek from the Stockholm School of Economics. I have lots of questions. I will try to limit it to one. When it comes to the investments that you are doing, Tink is a savings app. Do you see any kind of tendencies? In which directions do you currently look for when you explore the new parts of fintech ventures? Is it more RegTech, it's InStech, it's fintech? In case it's fintech, which type of fintech?
Good question. That's the one we're asking ourselves as well. I think the first year now has elapsed where we've been more open to what's in this area of fintech within digitalization. We're trying not to narrow it down to be too sort of narrowed fintech, but really everything that is important for the financial industry. So AI, machine learning, which is not necessarily fintech related always, but more broader sense, data lake solutions and so on. But we think solutions for small and medium-sized enterprises is very interesting. We don't see very much within large corp solutions, where we'd like to see even more. It's been mainly focused on the lending side. I mean, no, it's not there anymore. Crowdfunding side and peer lending. It's been a lot. Robo-advice, we haven't seen yet. I think maybe the one to come, but it's not there yet, which will be really interesting, just like Per said as well. If you can really make use of all that data that's available and make smart solutions, that would be so helpful for the customers. But more focused on in what area will the solutions be used, and that's we would like to see more in the large corporate area.
Yes, here we go.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Uldis Serbs. I'm from Finansinspektionen, advisor to Director General, I have a short remark. I think we have mentioned a number of times the work we are doing together with the Fintech Hub and with the Fintech industry more generally. So my short remark is about the fact that we are expected in last date of November to complete a report that was requested by Per Bolund on the ways how Finansinspektionen is contemplating the possibility to change its processes in order to meet the dynamic needs of the fintech industry, and that can take different forms. That can take the form of a sandbox. That can take a form of different interactions with companies during the licensing process, and so on. And I think that entails a quite fundamental rethink how to balance the needs of the industry and technology that could potentially benefit the consumers against the potential risks, so that we avoid, you know, the pitfalls of having a straightforward, smooth path for the likes of the trust buddies that may eventually, you know, cause big harm for the initiative. So just finding an appropriate balance and is a key to the work we're doing. And I perhaps can also introduce Stig, who is over there at the other end of the room, who is one of the project managers. But using the opportunity, I can just say that perhaps a short advertising about the fact that in the beginning of June we are going to have a number of seminars together with the fintech industry to identify those specific needs of different clusters of the industry, and they were cooperating very closely with both Vinnova and the Fintech Hub. So please follow our public communication, and you're very much welcome to participate in those activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, let's continue here.
Hello, my name is Mikael Hjort and I come from 421. I have a question to the panel about consolidation of the fintech market. So now we see lots of different small services, or well, depending what you compare it to, but small services popping up, like you have those specialized in lending, those specialized in credit scoring, specialized in investing, so on and so on. Do you believe that in the future we will see a consolidation wave of where you know, larger banks or larger other institutions basically sweep up the market and collect it under one brand? Or do you see it as these services continuing to become even more specialized in the future?
I think there will be a combination of that, definitely so. I think the banks will absolutely, instead of developing themselves, they will also acquire or invest in more startups to facilitate with the technology that they need to go into that direction that the banks will be going. And for the companies themselves, at one point they need to have a sustainable business model. During the startup phase, you can survive and test and thrive using hopefully the capital that you can raise along the way. But at some point, you will need to make it profitable. And then I think some of the fintech companies will not manage within their small niche to satisfy, so they will have to sell off to another, either if that will be probably not necessarily only banks, but also new actors, if that will be Klarna or Alipay or and so forth.
I think just quickly, really quickly, I think it's going to be a sector within fintech. So I think we've seen payments, we've seen the surge and then the decline of the payment providers springing up here in the Nordics. But we're now seeing lots of blockchain and crypto companies coming. So I think we'll see waves within different sectors of fintech.
Yes, I agree. I think there's a big difference between which country you're in, which sector, and which solution you're in. But one aspect that I think is rarely commented on. I mean, basically, when you have investments, experimentation, fragmentations, that's followed by consolidation or a shakeout at least. And one of the mechanisms for that, which it's rarely talked about, is that the main competitors for many fintech startups are other fintech startups. In the same country or in an adjacent country. And this competition we can see in certain sectors, for example, like the online lending platforms in China, which is undergoing a huge wave of consolidation, partly driven by regulation or increase of regulation, but also just because there comes a point where the competition is just so fierce that it's not possible to survive without significant scale. Having said that, another thing that I think we'll see more of consolidation is in banking, for sure. Maybe not in Sweden, so it's quite concentrated already, but for sure in Southern Europe and possibly in the US as well. Fun or little known fact is that the big banks that were in the financial crisis in the US, they're even bigger now. And I think that's a process that will continue as well.
Okay. More consolidation in both startups and big banks. You had one more question, please, Michael.
I use all of the space I can get. When it comes to their, let's say, limitation, we're number 2, number 4. My question to you guys is why are we not number 1? Let's exclude the regulation and the housing crisis, or the housing market, not calling it a crisis. What do you think? What are the key challenges, and how could they be solved?
If I quickly answer the first bit, we're not number 1 because we were later to deliver a platform of fintech. The UK did it because in the UK there isn't manufacturing tax revenue; it's all financial services, right? So when they saw the crash and the aftermath of the crash in 2010, the first thing the government did is put billions of pounds into new innovation in financial services to keep that future going in terms of tax revenue. And it's then the size of market, 65 million people UK, 10 here. We can't compete on that level, but we can do it per capita. And then per capita, I think within 3 years we can easily get there if we all do what we're doing and we do it in the speed that we need to do it.
Positive. Soon to be number 1 in Europe at least, I guess.
Post-Brexit.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess it also depends on how you measure things. Because we're a small market, so how attractive is it in a scale? But I mean, per capita, we're doing pretty well in some areas, not in others. Another thing I think is that we have to recognize the fact that the banking sector has been, in many ways, driving a lot of the key solutions that are actually or transforming how we consume financial services. And that might be, depending on your perspective, bad for innovation long term, or how you choose to see it. But if you look from a purely usage side of it, I mean, Swish is kind of unique, mobile bank ID is kind of unique. Comparing it to for example, China or the US, when they're number 1 in terms of investments, but it's very much because their financial infrastructure isn't that great. So they really need, there are real opportunities there.
So maybe what you're saying is that we are actually number 1 when it comes to the services. We should have a different measure.
I think it's hard to achieve that. The only way to achieve it, basically, to be number 1 is to have our fintech companies expand in Europe. And of course, SEPA and PSD, especially PSD2, will give great opportunities for that.
We have one more question over here.
Hello, my name is Jonas Ingelström. I'm working with ScienceTech. My question to you would be, what would be your, not looking at the world, looking at Europe, for example, for Playground, what would be your main, or where do you see the most potential for fintech investments or fintech opportunities at this moment?
So to date, we focus on Nordic and Baltic areas when we look for investments. We're starting to reach out a bit to the UK, Germany, and Ireland, just because if we, even more so from a strategic perspective, wants to team up with certain startups in certain areas, and we sort of look for, now we need this solution, where can we find that? Then we don't want to limit ourselves to the Nordics or the Baltics. We would like to, of course, find the companies in this area, but if we don't, then we will want to expand further on. But we haven't looked that much overseas yet. I think that it's different markets, so we come from various standpoints, whereas Benjamin mentions that in Sweden or in the Nordics we already come from a fairly sort of high standpoint when it comes to the services that we as financial customers get from the banks as today, versus the American who some years ago still sent checks around. So in that environment, being a startup, it's of course fairly easy just by looking what do they have in Sweden. So being an entrepreneur in Sweden and going from this to that is challenging, but probably also rewarding when you make it. Maybe not answer to a question, but that's sort of where we live right now.
Two things. First of all, it depends what you're doing. So, for example, we see a lot of our members want to go into the German market, which is a very cash society. So a lot of the cashless society applications don't necessarily work there. The second thing, in terms of market speed of growth at the moment, the most surprising one that we've seen is actually Switzerland. So Zurich is now actually number 2 in Europe in terms of investments made and in terms of products and fintech being taken on. Amsterdam is there, but there's a couple of investments by ABN AMRO that have sort of scuppered those figures. And of course Germany and France, now that the French election's over and it went the right way, unless you're a Le Pen voter or supporter, then we'll see France continue with that investment and that evolution as well. But yes, Switzerland was the most surprising for us.
I'll jump outside of Europe then just because you've covered everything else. I mentioned China, but of course it's already happening there, and it's fierce competition and also some very big actors evolving there. I would also like to mention India. There's a lot of things happening in India. The demonetization of India, which is quite forcibly pushed by the government, is going extremely quickly. Now about 30% of non-cash payments are by mobile payments, non-card mobile payments. So it's moving very quickly. The identification scheme Aadhaar is just fantastic. In just 5 or 6 years, they've enrolled virtually the entire Indian population, 1.2 billion people, with biometric information and know your customer applications. They built a unified payments infrastructure or initiative, UPI. And they're issuing a lot of special bank charters, basically just transaction accounts. So I think India will do the journey of China fairly quickly, and that's of course the next huge market in terms of users.
Okay, great. I want to round off by this, and I want to urge you to read the report. Really great piece, and
it will be available for download soon, right?
Yes, soon on the Vinnova homepage, and you can get the physical one here, right? And also to say something about that, there will be this roundtable meetings that Finansinspektionen will publish on their homepage, and so you're welcome to join in there. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much for today, and please have a cup of coffee when you go out, and feel free to roam around. Thank you. Bye bye.